Hello everybody and welcome back to Civilization 5. So, you're trying to beat the game on whatever difficulty is the max for you, but I'm targeting this particularly for players who want to go hard and fast. I'm talking 8 difficulty, I'm talking Deity, but really this works across the board. If you follow this strategy, which I'm going to take you through, my strategy for the tech tree and how to really game the tech tree and do the best research you can, then stick with me. There are 2 other videos in the description that are related. The first one is my more broad discussion on Deity, which will be posted not too long after this one, if you're watching it on the day it's posted, and also another video that I recently made on how to maximize growth through science. And those tips will stay true, so do check them out. But let's not muck around. Let's jump in and talk about the tech tree. There is an ideal way, I think, to play the tech tree to your advantage, and it will ensure that you can sort of fight back against those really unfair starting positions that the AI has, right? So let's roll through. First up, Pottery. Take Pottery and build a shrine. Not because you're necessarily expecting to get a religion, but because the Pantheon bonuses are pretty good, okay? They're pretty good. Next up, it's a dual action. Mining first, purely because we want to be able to chop down forests. Chopping down forests provides production to the city where you chop them down. So it's important for pushing out things like an early shrine if you can chop down a forest and complete it near instantly. Next up, part of the double whammy here is writing. Writing, obviously really important because you need to build libraries. The first science building in the game. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that, but it's true. And also it unlocks the Great Library, but for those of you who are playing at a higher difficulty, I wouldn't recommend trying to build it. The AI will beat you because it has such an advantage in the early game. You're just not on level with it here, so don't go for that. Next up, this one varies slightly depending on where you spawn, but you should focus in on your luxury techs. By that I mean, let's say you need to construct a camp to harvest a certain luxury resource. Or maybe you need to build a plantation, so you need calendar. For example, let's say you spawned here in Attila's court with cocoa. You need to build a plantation to get the happiness, which is primarily what you want, from it. So you need to research calendar. If you're like me and you've got gold, well, lucky you. It was a double whammy. It was a double whammy with mining because you also unlock the ability to construct the mine. Next up, and it's something I have touched on before, but it's really important, we're going to gloss ahead slightly, and I will gloss over, but don't forget philosophy. You do need to move through writing to philosophy to get that national college. And I've covered that more in my other deity strategy, but in a nutshell, you need to push this hard and fast, probably while you've got 2 or 3 cities before you expand any further. Next up though, and the actual next one, is civil service, which I have covered before, but civil service is really strong because we need it as a base layer as we move through, but also the extra food yield from farms is a really sort of frequently forgotten about but really important benefit of civil service. It's more passive, but it really matters. Next up, this one may not surprise a lot of you, it's education. Education, of course, provides universities. You should be ready to build these as soon as you research education. You really can't muck around on the higher difficulties. So either have gold ready, have a forest ready to chop down, or just have a city ready to build. There are some other things here, like it also allows, conversion of research and research agreements, but really we want the university. We're not so interested in Oxford University at the higher difficulties, but in the earlier difficulties, it's not a bad wonder. Next up, and this may seem a little odd, but bear with me, my next top tech to grab is Acoustics. Now, you may need to go back and do some backfilling afterwards, but I'd recommend that you grab Acoustics first, and here is why. See, Acoustics is in the Renaissance era. If I draw a line down the middle of my screen, it's in the Renaissance era just. Once you grab a tech in the Renaissance era, everything from the previous era becomes cheaper. It works the same with any era, by the way. Once you get one in industrial, everything in Renaissance is cheaper, so on and so forth. So, if we grab Acoustics, even though we don't want anything that it gives us, we can then backfill say, machinery if you don't have it, or guilds if you don't have it, much cheaper. It's at a discounted research rate, which is fantastic for us. There is another reason why we need acoustics though, and it's because of the next TECHS that we want. Next up is architecture. Architecture unlocks the porcelain tower. Now, by and large, in a Deity match, I don't recommend players build most wonders. However, the porcelain tower is different. If you can, and you've played this properly and you've got there first, I would recommend you consider the porcelain tower. It's really good. It requires rationalism, but gives you a great scientist and 2 great scientist points. And that matters a lot, as you see when I'm going to go through the next ones. But the great scientist, of course, allows the building of a unique tile improvement called an academy. You can see here, this one gives me plus 16 science, right? So I can just go bump, and it builds the academy. Bear that in mind, because as I go through these next ones, you'll see why it's so important to put down academies like these. Jumping back into the tech tree. Next up, scientific theory. It's straight across, but you will need to backfill, but don't worry, economics is a great tech, so it's all good. Grab scientific theory, and again, be ready to smash out these public schools. Public schools provide plus 3 science and plus 1 science for every 2 citizens. They also have a scientist slot. That is a great scientist slot blood. But if I jump into my city, just to remind you guys, all of these scientific buildings, like the university, like the public school, have slots for scientists to work. And look at the yields. These guys are incredible. Plus 5 science, plus 3 great scientist points, so we can build more of these tile improvements, and plus 1 production, which is just a handy bonus for specialists. So you want to make sure that you're building these and filling them up with specialists, which is why it's so important to have a high population. Because without a high population, you can't have specialists, because you also need to be working your city tiles with them as well, right? Let's move on from that. I won't ramble about specialists too much longer. Maybe. So next up is acoustics. Next up, after scientific theory, is electricity. Definitely not going back to the Renaissance era. Electricity is important because it not only does it springboard us through the tech tree, but also it provides aluminium, which you're going to want if you want to build spaceship parts, which you may end up doing if you don't take more of an aggressive victory stance. It's because we're gearing towards science, right? So it makes sense. You're probably going to want around 6 aluminium resources to get as much as you need. Next up is radio. B-line radio. Why? Because it pushes you into the modern era. Again, that unlocks discounts at the previous level. But more importantly than that, it's fundamental that you beeline it because you'll probably get the first ideology pick. Because you've moved so quickly up here, it's unlikely that other civs have had the time to establish, through and get workshops and build factories, get coal, build factories. You've just quickly nipped ahead into the modern era and probably got the first ideology, which is great for you because you'll get lots of bonuses. Next up, probably the last fundamental science tech is plastics, because it unlocks the research lab, which is just the public school on steroids, right? Plus 50% science, plus 4 science, another scientist slot. It's so good. Again, be ready to smash these out, whether you're building them with gold or you have cities waiting to build them. I don't mind how you do it, but get them out as fast as you can. They should be priority number 1 as soon as you can build them. Finally, the last really core fundamental tech is atomic theory. That's because it paves the way for perhaps a more aggressive victory if you need to go the domination route with the atomic bombs. It unlocks uranium, which is great, but also academy yields are improved by 2. So if you've been following this strategy throughout, you'll have some really significantly improved academies by this point. Lastly, the sort of 3 triple whammy techs that I want you to grab are radar, rocketry, and satellites. Radar is fundamental for us to get rocketry, which allows the Apollo program. And then from rocketry, you go to satellites, which gives you the Hubble Space Telescope. And I would really recommend you smash this out. You should get there first, because you should have overtaken the AI around the modern era, and now be at least competitive with them, but hopefully much further ahead of them, in the tech tree anyway. push out the Hubble Space Telescope, you get 2 free scientists, which again stacks with our academies, our yields. We're building up these really strong academies and this really strong science build. It will also provide you with a free spaceship factory, which is great if you want to go for the science victory, and plus 25% production to spaceship parts. So make sure you build this in your capital or your sort of best city. And from there, you can expand out. Say you want the Death Squads, or XCOM Squads in my case, then you can push that aggressive route. Perhaps you go to particle physics and get the SS engine and go to the science victory, or maybe you go tourism or diplomacy. The option is yours, but by following my fundamentals from pottery through to satellites, I'm hoping that this will help you get a really great science game. You see, I managed 1300 in this game, and I didn't even go for a science victory, and I was playing as Venice. So see if you can beat that. There's a challenge to you. There's a challenge. And otherwise, I think that'll do for this video. Again, check out the related videos in the description when they're live, and drop a like if you enjoyed. And other than that, I think that'll do it from me. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you in the next one.